Some people don't know how to live without pressure. And it's not because they enjoy suffering, right? And it's not because they want drama in their life, but because survival really has become so normalized. And when survival becomes normalized, peace really feels unfamiliar. Um, and sometimes even dangerous. It even feels dangerous. So you finally get a quiet moment, and instead of relaxing, you feel restless, right? You just feel restless, uneasy, this little energy surge. So you check your phone, maybe you start overthinking, maybe you start creating problems that weren't there 5 minutes ago, right? And maybe you keep choosing toxic relationships, impossible workloads, emotional volatility, right? Maybe you start craving a constant urgency. Maybe you start craving adrenaline. You have to have it, right? And you tell yourself, right, this is just how life is. But what if your nervous system became addicted to the chaos? What if that's what's happening, right? What if the thing exhausting you is also the thing your body learned to depend on? And if this is resonating to you, I think this episode tonight's for you. Talking about the addiction to chaos. This is The Forge. What's up, guys? Welcome back to The Forge. This is where we build something solid. Full disclosure right now, on the monitor to my right up here, I have got my Flyers on, right? My Flyers are in the Stanley Cup, right? How could I not have the Stanley Cup playoffs? Right now, they're smashing it out with the Carolina Hurricanes. How could I not have the Stanley Cup playoffs? The Broad Street Bullies are on. I'm there, but I'm definitely here, right? Like, I got to record this episode. I want to record this episode, but I also, I got to know what's happening, right? I got to know. I'm not going to record it and watch it later. Come on. Anyways, welcome back to The Forge, right? This is a pretty cool episode tonight. Today we're talking about something that most people really never realize is happening to them. It's the addiction to chaos. Let that sit for a second. Being addicted to chaos, we hear that word addiction, we don't necessarily think about chaos. And you might even be like, what is addiction to chaos? Well, we're going to get into it. And I don't mean addiction in like a dramatic sense. I mean addiction in a neurological sense, right? A neurological conditioning of chaos. A nervous system that got so used to surviving, right? That calm started to feel wrong. It just felt not good. What do I do with this, right? I got to change it up. And we may not have even realized that we're doing this, but in a lot of men and women that I see, we're definitely doing this. And myself, I've definitely done this, and I definitely do this sometimes, right? And if you've ever sabotaged peace, picked fights in good relationships, right? Or felt uncomfortable when life finally slowed down. Well, this episode is probably for you, right? Probably for you. So where are we going to start? Well, we're going to start figuring out, your brain learns how to survive, right? Let's start with the nervous system. Like, the human brain adapts to repetition. It does. We're mammals, we're trainable, period. Right? In my work with horses, right? They're amazingly beautiful animals, so intelligent, so trainable, right? So trainable with a certain type of conditioning. So whatever environment you spend enough time in, your body starts treating that as your normal, right? Starts treating it as your normal. So if you grew up around, I don't know, conflict, unpredictability, addiction, emotional instability, violence, constant criticism, constant criticism, right? Your nervous system learns something important very early, right? You need to stay alert, right? You need to stay alert. These are unpredictable patterns, and sometimes they're not even patterns. So your nervous system is staying alert. So your body adapted back to the Amy of your brain. Your amygdala, your threat detection system, became more active because it had to, right? It had to be more active so that you could have a sense of safety. So in turn, your cortisol, and adrenaline systems became way more efficient, right? Talking about like sports car with nitrous oxide tank efficiency. Like that's what happens, right? So your body learned, right, to scan that room. Your body learned that you should always be expecting danger and to prepare for an impact of some sort, some kind of emotional impact, physical impact. I mean, the list goes on. But really, here's the important part. That adaptation probably helped you survive. Not probably, that adaptation helped you survive. And because it's a survival strategy that you have been conditioned to, that adaptation isn't weakness. It's really intelligence, right? It's intelligence. Can you imagine, right? Your brain picked up on repeating patterns and regulated itself based on those repeating patterns to give you a sense of safety. I mean, that's a pretty big deal, right? So your nervous system kept you alive is what I'm trying to say. But survival adaptations don't always turn off, right, when the danger's gone. I mean, you learned these skills likely early on in life or likely because of your job or your service. And just because the service is over or just because I am no longer living that life where I picked up these skills does not mean that your brain just rewires itself, right? It's still operating on this blueprint for survival. And that's something pretty important to recognize. And so, when does peace feel unsafe? And I think here's where things get strange, right? So eventually chaos stops feeling chaotic. It starts feeling familiar, right? So chaos, great example is like first time I ever got on my Harley, first time I ever rode a motorcycle. We'll go back then. First time I ever got on a motorcycle, man, my heart was pounding. Like it was just this rush of adrenaline. I could hear my heart beating in my ears. Like it was insanely wild. It was insanely wild. I felt exhausted after I got off that bike at that time. Now when I go riding, it's the one place I find peace. It's so peaceful, right? I'd actually bet money on it that my heart rate slows down. My breathing starts to slow down. I get off of it. I feel relaxed. I feel all zen. Same process, right? And that's why some people, they leave calm relationships for toxic ones because toxic is what they know. They know how to survive in toxic. Even if they don't recognize that it's a toxic relationship that they're seeking, they likely feel a little more familiar in toxicity than they do in something that's peace and calm, right? That's why maybe some people create urgency, right, when none exists. Like I can't function when I'm like right on my deadline. When I'm hitting the objectives on my deadline, I gotta just stop and wait until the last minute, and then I just haul ass and I get everything done. That can be a form of this chaotic, like injecting chaos into our life. Overworking until we collapse. That's another way, right? Like, I don't know how to just work, 9 to 5. And honestly, I'm not saying everybody has that luxury, but, I don't know how to not just work all the time. even when I'm tired, even when I need a break. Like, I don't know how to not do that, because if I don't have that feeling of being overworked, something feels off. It feels wrong, right? And sometimes, I think we can find ourselves, some people might feel deeply uncomfortable in stillness. And stillness, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, where that peace precedes pain, right? Especially in our PTSD, complex PTSD. Peace precedes pain. And stillness sometimes can be peace. Yeah, sometimes that is where that chaotic feeling comes from, is things are just too still, things are just too calm. And the brain always tries to return to what's familiar, right? Even if it hurts. That's the trap. That's the trap that it falls into. And some people, we don't consciously want chaos, but subconsciously, our nervous system trusts it more than it trusts peace, right? It trusts chaos more than it trusts peace. And so, here's something that most people, I don't think, realize, is chaos can become like chemically stimulating. It really can. If you've ever dove out of an airplane with a parachute, if you ever went bungee jumping, if you've ever, if you're a motorcycle rider, if you're someone that's like chasing a thrill, like a thrill seeker, right? There's that feeling that you get, right? That high almost. And it really is like a high. It's like an adrenaline high. It's, things kind of tend to feel very euphoric when we're doing something very adrenaline heavy and stimulating. So when your body is in survival mode, obviously your adrenaline increases, your cortisol spikes, your dopamine gets involved in anticipation and unpredictability. You become neurologically conditioned to activation. That's kind of what's happening in that process. And after enough years of that, stillness just feels empty. It feels empty to just, if you're used to being that adrenaline heavy person, if you're used to being, a combat veteran, right? Some of my combat vets, they don't know how to reintegrate back into society again, because society is like so boring compared to what they've come from. And even though the boring of society is safe, like, they don't have the nervous system that's wired for that integration. They're not turning off their threat detection, right? So it's kind of like what I think I've said this before, and at times, like, I play ice hockey. Hello, I'm watching ice hockey right now, right? I can't get away from the adrenaline and the chaos. For people that have never played ice hockey, they've never played a heavy contact sport, um, that thought of that might be terrifying. It might be terrifying. Your heart's probably racing to think that you'd put on a pair of ice skates and skate 20 miles an hour and willfully try to run into somebody. But for me at this point, when I'm on the ice rink, it's almost like, with respect to PTSD, that chaotic energy, now I'm engaging in something where everything around me is kind of vibrating on that same energy. So my surroundings become normalized, and I start to feel how maybe someone without that would feel in like stillness, right? Being on the ice and everyone's skating fast and everyone's knocking into each other. And that feels actually kind of calm and still for me. And that's okay, because truthfully, in my case, ice hockey is a very healthy outlet for something like that. Riding my Harley is a very healthy outlet, as long as it's done safely, right? Staying in the speed limit, wearing your helmet, doing things you're supposed to do. Those can be healthy outlets of finding that regulation, right? So, again, it's not because peace is bad, right? That's not why stillness feels empty. It's because your nervous system has been surviving on intensity for so long that regulation feels emotionally flat. It feels so flat. And This is kind of why healing, I think, can feel really boring at first, right? It feels really boring. And that line really matters. So I'll say it again. Healing can feel boring at first. It really can. And my vets and my first responders, I'm talking to you guys out there. Healing can be such a drag in the beginning. There's no excitement. There's no, it's hard to like switch that off right away, right? Because your body mistakes calm for emptiness. And so, let's make this real for a second. The addiction to chaos can look like relationships. You say you want stability, but stable people feel boring. Stable people feel really boring, right? So meanwhile, emotionally unavailable or unpredictable people, they feel really exciting. They do, they feel really exciting. And it's not because they're healthier, but it's because unpredictability really activates familiar circuitry, right? Familiar circuitry. If we're talking about work, you only feel productive under extreme pressure. Why is that? Well, I mean, if we just rule out ADD and ADHD for a second, you procrastinate until the last second, not because you're lazy, but because urgency activates the nervous system state your brain performs best in. It just does. It doesn't have to be that way forever. Obviously, that's why we have therapy. That's why we have treatments and things. So that if this is becoming problematic for you, we can work to rewire that brain. We can work to rewire that nervous system. So, yeah, relationships work. Emotional conflict, right? You ever been there where like things are calm for 2 days and then like suddenly you start over analyzing? You start overanalyzing like tone changes. You start overanalyzing text messages. You start overanalyzing body language, right? You start searching for danger. You start searching for threats. You start searching for conflict because your body is like expecting it, right? Your body expects it. And so to feel somewhat normal with it, like it starts to search for it. It starts to search for it in places where it's really not even there. So yeah, that's kind of interesting, I thought. I think another place that, you know, chaos shows up in real life is sometimes with our identity, right? So some people become so attached to being the strong one. Some people become so attached to being the fixer, right? The survivor. Those are all real things, that peace creates an identity crisis in some ways, right? Because you're no longer surviving. Who are you, right? If you're no longer surviving, who the hell are you? And that's a scary place to be. If you don't know, if you don't have some kind of structure to figure it out, right? It's kind of like in a previous episode, like you're more than the uniform. Man, if that uniform had to come off today, if you had to take that uniform off today, if that badge got taken away from you today, can you say you know who you are and who that person is? Are you comfortable with that person? Right? And if your answer is no, or it's a little slow, yes, this could be a way chaos is kind of showing up in your identity. So yeah, the service member and first responder trap, I think, this hits especially hard again in military culture, EMS, fire, law enforcement, healthcare, because those professions reinforce the survival wiring. They really do. And, because those professions reinforce survival wiring, you're rewarded for hypervigilance, right? You're rewarded for emotional suppression. You're rewarded for a rapid response, and you're rewarded for functioning under pressure. And thank God you are, right? Because I don't know about you, but I don't want some lazy ass fireman just kind of like showing up to my house when things are blazing, just like, yeah, give me like 5 minutes, and I'm just gonna, kind of take my time here. No, I need a rapid response. So again, I'm not saying that these things are problems. I'm saying the problem comes from when we can't do anything else, when we're not working, right? That can be the problem. And so those those rewards kind of become identity. And the problem is your nervous system doesn't always know when the shift ends, right? It doesn't know when it ends. You know when it ends, but your nervous system inside of you is just like, oh, we're still on the truck. We're still going for runs. We're still waiting for codes. We're still hearing the bullets fly. Like, it doesn't know. You're the one that has your eyes. Your nervous system does not have your eyes. So, you go home physically, but neurologically, you're still deployed, right? Neurologically, you're still on shift. You're still scanning. You're still preparing. You're still unable to settle. And after years of that, yeah, peace can feel unnatural. It totally can feel unnatural. So you're not broken, right? Let's get that straight. You are not broken. You have seriously just been conditioned. So it's a conditioning that we're talking about. So, I think in some of my clients, they don't necessarily come to me first because they feel like there is a problem with these things that we've talked about. But they do come to me because their relationship or relationships are falling apart. They are not the spouse they feel like they should be, or they're being told that. They're not the father, the mother that they should be, the brother, sister, son. They're not integrated into their relationships too well. And that is usually, I would probably say 80% of the time, when they show up to me. And so, this is where chaos really becomes heartbreaking, because people with survival conditioned nervous systems often hurt the relationships they want the most. Not intentionally, because healthy connection, it really requires some basic things: safety, trust, stillness, and consistency, predictability, right? And consistency and predictability can really feel vulnerable when your body is always expecting instability, right? I'm going to say that one more time. Consistency and predictability can feel vulnerable when your body expects instability. And so what happens? You may pull away. You may start to test people. You may shut down. You may create distance between you and the people that you love. You may pick fights, and you might emotionally really be living in a way that you're embracing for abandonment, like almost all the time. So if I'm bracing for an abandonment all the time, how close am I actually allowing myself to get to people? Probably not very close, right? Probably not very close. And it's not because you don't care. You do care, which is why this stuff matters to you. But it's because your nervous system is trying to protect you, right? It's trying to protect you from a threat that really just doesn't exist right now. And that's an important distinction, right? Protection and sabotage, self-sabotage, can look identical from the outside. It really can. Some of the people I've worked with, like, it really just depends on who's telling them, what they're observing, right? To them, it's, I'm protecting you, right? From the spouse's perspective, it's, you're sabotaging everything good in your life, right? It really looks identical. And it's hard to distinguish the two. But this is where we get into the hope part, right? So now here's the hopeful part. The brain can change. The brain can change regardless of age. I'm throwing it out there, right? Neuroplasticity is a real thing. But rewiring survival patterns is the same process for wiring those survival patterns. We're talking about repetition, right? Your nervous system has to learn calm is safe. It has to learn stillness is survival, and it has to learn connection is not automatically dangerous. And how do we do that? Well, as mammals who are very trainable, we have to slowly acclimate ourselves to repeating some of those patterns. Like, we really have to do that. And honestly, That whole process feels wildly uncomfortable. It feels wildly uncomfortable because healing is not just emotional, right? It's biological. Like you are literally teaching your body a new definition of safety, right? If my whole life, like think of it in a very simple term, we might see something on fire, right? We may be sitting outside by our fire pit. We just automatically know without having to think that putting my hand in that fire is dangerous and it's going to hurt. Like we just know that. It is so ingrained in us. How fast do you think it would take you to turn that off and be like, oh, fire's a good thing. I'm just going to go bathe in it, right? Nuts, insanity. No one would ever think that. The good thing is that when we're talking about emotional and biological safety, we're not really talking about like that kind of fiery threat. So it's not going to take a whole lifetime to rewire this process. It may have taken a lifetime to get there, but it's not going to take a whole lifetime to rewire. But it does take time. It takes a little patience, right? It takes more than 1 or 2 therapy sessions. Sometimes it takes 6 months. Sometimes it might take a year. Regardless of how long it takes, what is it worth to you to gain from the time that you spend engaging in something that is helping you be more connected, right? What is it worth to you? That's a question you should ask yourself. What's it worth to me for this not to be maybe the fastest process, right? So what actually helps? What actually helps in all of this? Here's what starts rewiring chaos addiction. It's pretty straightforward. Predictable routines, right? Consistency teaches safety. Predictable routines. Movement, exercise helps metabolize chronic stress activation, right? That's a real biological thing. It's not just one of those things where, oh, I'm going outside and everything feels great and I'm in my happy, positive place. It definitely can be that. But there's some real biological components kind of happening and shifting through movement. And I'm not even talking about like crazy exercise at the gym. I'm just saying, get in your flops and go to the walking path and just stroll around. We don't have to think Mount Everest here. We can think something small, right? Third thing that is kind of tough, I think, if we're not used to it, but I call it mindful stillness, right? We're not forcing relaxation. We're just learning to tolerate calm without escaping it and avoiding it, right? So it may be uncomfortable, sitting in that lazy boy recliner in the family room with the rest of the family. And that's okay, right? That's okay. The expectation is not, okay, I'm going to sit in this chair and I'm going to feel peace. Here it comes. No, that is not the expectation. The expectation is I might only have like a tolerance window of like 10 or 15 minutes that I can be in this recliner before I feel like I have to escape. Great. Then at least you know where you're starting, right? Sit in that recliner until that intensity comes and then just set 1 more minute. Just set 1 more minute. Set for 30 more seconds, right? And then gradually push that out a little bit. That's something you can do. I think a fourth thing is really safe relationships, right? Surrounding ourselves by people who are consistent, by people who are grounded, and people who are emotionally regulated. Maybe not, they don't have to be like the best at it, but maybe a little bit more emotionally regulated than ourselves, right? Not exciting chaos, right? Real safety. That's what we're talking about, real safety. And I think that, expanding our identities, right? Having this identity expansion is you must become more than just the survivor. And that's huge, right? Because survival cannot be your only mode forever. It just can't be. For so many reasons. Like it literally just cannot be your primary mode of that you live in forever, right? So our identity, if you are a firefighter, police officer, active duty military, right? Like that's a big part of your identity. And I get that. And I'm not telling you guys and gals out there to get rid of that identity. I'm saying you can incorporate some other things, right, into that identity piece and still be that guy or girl with the badge and the uniform. You can still do that. I still want you to do that. The world needs you. We all need you so desperately, but we don't want you crashing out because that identity has basically become the predominant living thing inside of you, right? Um, you are likely made up of many more parts than just your badge and uniform and job. Um, you are a father, probably a mother, a friend. You can be a friend without being a firefighter at the same time. You can play just a sport. You can be a bird watcher, you can be a hiker, you can be a biker, you can be lots of things where that identity belongs to itself alone, right? And that doesn't mean that you're not still those other things. um so yeah, addiction to chaos is real, man. It's so real. And it doesn't have to be something that you have to get rid of either, right? It literally can just be things that you can engage in a more healthy way, right? Like I can ride a Harley Davidson. I don't have to ride a Harley Davidson 120 miles an hour with no helmet, right? I can still kind of lean towards some of those high energy. I can still be slightly adrenaline seeking, right? I can take some classes and I can go skydiving, and that can be a safe thing, right? It doesn't have to be safe for everybody, but I can make that something as safe as possible, right? I can go rock climbing with the right equipment, with the right training, right? It's not just me looking at, face of a mountain being like, oh, I'm just going to climb that in just like my regular shoes, right? That's when it starts to become dangerous chaos. So there are lots of ways to rework this. Obviously, I would say, um, this is going to be a much easier process when you're not doing it alone. When you're doing it with someone who is trained to help you do this. And trust me, I mean, as a therapist for veterans and first responders, I try my best to make this not as boring of a healing process as possible, right? I'm going to force you to be boring sometimes. I'm sorry, but I am. But I promise that when you kind of do your due diligence and you find the right therapist that connects with you, they're going to understand these things, right? They're going to understand these things. I'm not going to ask right off the bat, without getting to know you, for a firefighter or a cop or, you know, uh, an emergency surgical team member to like, you should just not go to work one day and just take up a pottery class. Like, let's just start there. That I know you guys better than that. All right. I always work hard to get to know the people that I'm working with. And we can make it fun, right? It can be fun. It can be specific to you, specific to what you want to do, right? So it doesn't all have to be boring. It does not all have to be boring. So I think in closing and summation for this, it's important to know that, some people are not addicted to drama, right? We gotta make sure that we cross that right there. We're not addicted to drama. We're addicted to familiarity. That's really what we're talking about here. We're addicted to what's familiar, right? And when chaos becomes familiar, peace can feel terrifying. Calm can feel terrifying. But I'm going to tell you again, peace is not weakness. It is not weakness. Stillness is not failure. And your nervous system is capable of learning something new. It really is. It is so capable of learning something new. It wants to. It wants to heal. That's the cool thing about our bodies and our nervous systems. They're always trying to heal. They're always trying to go back to what is homeostatic to it, if that makes any sense. They're always trying to return to a state of peace, even if peace is not what we were brought up in. It knows what its baseline normal is, and it's always trying to achieve that. But there are things we can do to make that happen a little bit faster than just sitting and waiting, right? And again, it compounds because poor decisions that we make when we're kind of engaging in chaotic situations, chaotic people, that compounds to the issue, right? It just keeps creating these delicate little layers that just make this onion that we're peeling apart much more complex. So I'm going to leave you this today. You are allowed to become someone who no longer needs war to feel alive. You are allowed to become someone who no longer needs death and destruction to feel happy and to feel alive inside and to feel that little pulse of energy surge. You totally are allowed to be that person, right? And that is not going to make you any less of the person that you are when you have to show up for duty. It's not going to make you any less. It's hard to believe, but it's actually going to make you better at what you do, right? Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate you hanging out with me. 1-1 so far for those of you watching the second game of the Flyers playoffs. I just had to throw that in there. Yep. Hurricanes won. Zegras just scored his first goal. So now it's tied up. Second quarter. All right. Thanks so much, guys. Love you so much. Be sure to give me a follow. Give me a like wherever that stuff's at. I don't know. I don't really get into all that stuff, but keep it locked in here. I appreciate you so much. Have a good one.